What's happening, everybody? It has been a while since I put some video up. A long while, actually. It's been kind of busy here at the studio and it's made it tough for me to keep up with getting more content. But this week we had a session I actually played on and we got a kind of cool, bitchin' fat drum tone, or at least I thought it was. We'll see if you agree. So I figured might as well shoot some video of this and show you what it sounds like. You can see it is two drums. It's simple. This was all groove stuff, nothing fancy. Really kick and snare and a hat with the occasional crash. Using my Gretsch 24x16 kick. It is a little dusty. Need it clean. And my Ludwig 6.5x14 Black Beauty with the big fat snare on the top of it. And mic-wise, only running 8 mics, but I decided to do a few things that I haven't done before just to try to get a different sound. So we'll run through that real quick. The kick, okay, this isn't that different. The inside is a Audio-Technica ATM250 with the Roswell Pro Audio Mini K on the outside. Now in the front here, I am running a Cascade Fathead II. It's about 2 feet out in front of the kick. Let me see if you can see. It's kind of staring right at the middle of it. And we'll get to that mic. It adds a lot of flavor to the kick drum. On the snare, a couple things going here. First off, Heil PR30, which I actually really dig on a snare. It's got a cool sound, and I'm using one of my homemade little baffles here. A lot of gaff tape and some foam, and a piece of was this from a drum head, or a drum head box, I think, on the one side. And that is just keeping out a little bit of hi-hat bleed out of that microphone. I also have another Heil PR30 on the hi-hat. Now the snare, having a big fat snare, man, I love these things. They're so cool. And the snare itself is tuned, here, I'll tap this a little bit, pretty freaking high. And pop this guy on, fattens it up nicely, and it's got a really cool sound, and we'll run through it in a second from the control room. Now the overhead. This is a microphone I have not used before until today on overheads, and it's the Roswell Pro Audio Colares. And I love this thing on vocals and acoustic guitar. It's flat out my favorite microphone, and it's really cool on overhead too. It's got a lot of character, a lot of color to it, and giving us a completely different vibe. So we have the mono overhead, and then I'm panning the hi-hat mic to give a little bit of a stereo image. Now the only other 2 mics we have in this setup way back over there, and they're about, a little over 7 feet up. One right there, and one back over here is a Roswell Pro Audio Delphos. And both of those are getting hit with the Tonelux TX5C. Now both kick mics are getting summed together on the console, going to one track, which we'll go over that in a minute. And that's pretty much the setup, and it's just all groove stuff, so let's go have a listen in the control room. Before we take a listen, I'll just do a quick rundown just of the overall setup for this. As you can see back here, chilling on the couch, there's the real boss. Man, he's been making me work hard lately. Okay, so the kick, like I said, kick in and kick out are on channel 1 and 2 of the console, and they're both getting a little EQ. I'm kind of adjusting it a little bit to add a little extra on the in and cleaning up the out a little bit, especially rolling off a lot of top. And then you can see up here, I'm sending them over to the bus, which is bus 1. And on the insert of bus 1, I have 2 things. And this is something I've been experimenting a lot with lately, and I've been really digging the results. It goes to first a Trident A-Range EQ. And I have the high pass filter. There's 25 hertz, and also rolling some 15K off. These filters are fantastic. I am pushing a low shelf at 100 hertz, about 3 dB. This is, nothing in the low mid. And then I'm pushing a little 5 and a tiny bit of a shelf at 10K on the top. I really dig these. I know I'm EQing on the board, the individual mics, but these A-Range EQs are punchy, and it's a great way to kind of sum the 2 mics together. Then that, as you can see, is called Kick Sum 1. Then that goes to Kick Sum 2, which is a Rupert Neve 542 tape emulator. These have quickly become my favorite pieces of gear love them. So the kick, I'm driving the input a little bit. Saturation's about 75%. I am at 15 IPS on here, and the blend is all at 100. I'm not using any of the silk on this one. And I love these, just this adds a little fatness. It also helps with dynamics without doing some compression, and that's where you can use this saturation. You can also get in trouble with that, but it's cool. Then the snare, on the insert on the snare track, there's only one, back over here on the console, only have one snare track, no bottom. I am getting a little bit of EQ on the console, and you can see the insert is on, and I'm pre-EQ insert. So the tape emulator is before this EQ. And the setting for that is just straight up on the input. I had the saturation also about 75%, 15 IPS on that as well. Then my only other outboard is the room mics, and they are on the TX5Cs, and these guys, it's a favorite pair of my compressors. They can be very gentle and pretty transparent, or they can get crazy. And in this case, I'm kind of in the middle. I'm beefing it up a little bit, using the tilt EQs, so it's, man, this thing is, they're great. So the overall setup is really mono overhead, kicks, and snare. I'm using the hi-hat mic so I can pan that out to the left a little bit and get a little bit of a stereo image. And then the rooms are left and right, but that's really just to add like a lot of crazy space around it, or turn them off and have a nice dry tone. So with that being said, I'm gonna stop blabbing and let's take a listen to what this sounds like. All right, so now we've walked through the setup, let's take a listen to our sounds. And I'll start with the kick drum, which again is summed, that came in on 1 and 2 of the console, got a little bit of EQ, then it got sent over here to bus 1, and on that bus was a Trident A-Range EQ going into a Rupert Neve 542 tape emulator. And this is what that sounded like. Big. That's a lot of low end. It's really full sounding, but we have a minimal mic setup and it kind of works. And if music going on, whatever, you could thin it out, but it's got a big sound. It sounds like a big bass drum. Okay, next, let's do the snare drum. Now this is the Black Beauty, 6.5 by 14 with the big fat snare on it. And it has got some EQ on the console, as well as a Rupert Neve 542 tape emulator on the inserts. And that's the snare. It's tuned really high, so if you pull the big fat snare drum off, man, it is just, oh my lord, is it high. But once you put that thing on there, it softens the transient up, but also keeps it fairly articulate. So you can do the ghost notes and some of the little stuff on there, and they don't just sound like mush completely. So, okay, moving on. Overhead. Again, this is the Roswell Pro Audio Colares, and this is my first time ever using an overhead, and it's pretty cool. You could actually take that, there's a lot of bass drum in there, because it's directly above the snare, but it's, you know, that kick drum is not too far out of its line of sight, so it's going to get a lot of that. You could actually create a pretty cool tone by just using that and then just bringing in a little kick and snare for some a little bit more punch. Now, one thing I forgot to mention while I was in there is I do have about 6 baffles kind of spaced around the kit, because you can hear the room, it's pretty roomy. Which we like for this. So, you know, you pull a kick snare and overhead up, you get a sense of space, which is really cool. Okay, hats. So the hats, you can hear a fair amount of snare in there too. So one thing I should mention, that when I was EQing that for the session, I was really paying attention because I did add, what did I add on the hi-hats? Not much. I had a high-pass filter at 50 hertz, nothing in the low mid or high mid. I do have a shelf probably starting at 4 or 5K on the console and maybe like 2.5 dB. And I was paying attention as I would do that because I wanted a little bite out of the hi-hats, but if I added too much, it did alter my snare sound. So the EQ that I did add to the hi-hats, I had to be okay with what it was doing to the snare. And in this case, I was. So it didn't bother me at all. Okay, let's get to the fun ones. The kit front. We'll get to this in context in a second, but here is what that sounds like. So you can hear that there's a lot of kick drum. There is a little bit of snare, a little bit of crash, but what I was looking for is something sitting a couple feet from the kick and hearing it as it starts to open up in the room, so you can really hear the resonant head on this. And I like that because it has some character and it adds a little bit of life. If you remember our kick sum sound, is pretty tight, it's dry, and it's got a lot of meat on it. And then we have the kit front, which you can hear is a little bit away from the drum, but it has the character. When you put the two together, I'll start with just the kick sum, and then I'll add the kit front, which really, it's a third kick drum mic. So it adds some character, that I liked. It's it's a little bit of that mid-range of the kick drum that's really cool, that kind of gets lost with an inside mic, doesn't really get it. And a lot of times even a mic that's right up on the head on the outside doesn't get it. And this drum has a little bit of muffling in it to tighten it up. So I wasn't getting that from the main two mics. And that's really what that's for. Now, none of this stuff has any compression so far. The only thing I'm using that you could consider a type of compression is the tape emulator. And I'm using the saturation as a way to not only kind of beef up the tone, which the 542s do a great job of just adding weight and size, but it also does kind of help contain the transients a little bit without sounding like compression at all. Now we get to the thing that I did compress, which is the rooms. Juice these up a little bit for now. Couple things here. One, the EQ that I was given it on the console was a fair amount, maybe about 4 or 5 dB of a low shelf that is, I don't know, 80 hertz, somewhere in there. I wanted the bottom to blow up. I am pulling a little bit of, somewhere around, 500 or 600, and I'm pushing somewhere in the, I don't know, 1-ish K area. And I'm also rolling about 4 or 5 dB off of maybe about a 10K shelf or so. So it's crunchy, and the compressor's getting hit pretty hard. That's one fun thing about the Tonelux, is it has this over compression mode. And I am not going to attempt to tell you what that is technically, because I'll just make a fool out of myself. I'm just going to tell you it's pretty freaking cool. And I wanted those to be crunchy because everything else is kind of round and it's fat, but it's still nice. Right, Oscar? Oscar's back here getting all his toys out. So, what does all this sound like together? Well, let's find out. First thing is I'm just going to bring the kick, the snare, overhead, and hats. So this could be like a dry, kind of focused sound. Okay, now I'm gonna add the kit front. So I'll let maybe a couple bars go by. I'm gonna pull this back down where it was, and I'll pull in that kick front after a few bars. So the kit front, you know, again, it's third kick mic, whatever. It really adds, it helps the kick drum. It kind of adds a little, you know, air, space around the kick so it doesn't sound so dry and focused. Now, what happens when we pull these rooms in? So what I'm gonna do is, again, I'm gonna let a few bars go by, and then I'm gonna kick those rooms on. And that was it. That was our setup. We were just doing grooves and things like that, and I thought it came out pretty well. I thought it was kind of a cool setup, a little different in some ways than what I normally do, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. So I hope everybody's doing well. I hope you're having a great start to the summer, making a lot of cool music, working with some cool people. That's definitely been going on here. Hopefully I'll get some updates coming out soon and some more content. But in the meantime, happy recording, and I hope all you are doing well. See you later.